amusing ourselves to death. Even a monkey can use social media. Now think, is the monkey as intelligent as a human being, or is human intelligence being reduced to the level of a monkey? Is social media making us stupid and unable to think? Try to imagine a university student from 100 years ago and a university student today. 100 years ago, there were fewer distractions. Who do you think had better focus, better reading skills? To understand this better, we need to know the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Postman. The excessive use of social media is harming our intelligence and our ability to think independently. That's why it is important to make a conscious effort to consume information more intelligently. Take your phone and go to the usage report to see how you're spending your time on the internet. How much time do you spend every day on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and Telegram, and WhatsApp, and all those social media apps? See how social media has become an integral part of our daily lives? It's the act of quickly swiping through that feed, the consumption of those 15-second short videos, one after the other. It is the message groups where we connect with hundreds of people, but without a single real connection. So those photo sharing social networks, we just need to look at the images. You don't need to think. And that's the problem. Attention, this is just a summary of a book. Read the full disclaimer before continuing. Social media is training your brain not to think. And that's why it's necessary to reason when necessary. We're being bombarded all the time by a storm of quick and superficial information that is easy to consume and doesn't make us think. In fact, it is even worse than that. The problem is not simply not needing to think to consume this type of content. The problem is that, in addition, by consuming too much content on social media, we're suffering a gradual atrophy in our brains. It is a systematic process of dumbing down. Similar to how a muscle becomes atrophied and weak when you don't use it for a long time, the brain also loses the capacity when it's not being challenged. Social media doesn't require you to think much. They just give you some instant gratification so you spend more time using the app. And that's the business model. That's how they generate all the data for their social media that they can sell to their advertisers. The more you use social media, the more dependent you become on this instant gratification. You know, when you wake up and immediately pick up your phone to take a look at what was happening, what's new, that's it. And with so much superficial content, our ability to think independently and critically is being eroded. If you can no longer concentrate to finish a book, to watch a full movie, or even read a simple article on the internet, you're probably already being affected by social media. If you feel anxious, afraid, or feel like you're missing out, or simply sad when you're comparing your life to all those images of what you see all the people doing on social media, you are also a victim of this modern disease. So let's not just stay with this summary of Postman's book, because here in our Arata Academy summary series, we don't just talk about literature, it's a very practical set of actions that we can take using valuable ideas from the books that we summarize. So here's already a practical activity. Take pen and paper and do some research. Open your favorite social network and carefully research what is being presented, what is being pushed to you on your feed. What are the content recommendations from the algorithm? And very important here, I'm not talking about specific lists of filtered content if you have used that type of feature. Also, I'm not talking about the private messages. I'm talking about the main feed, the content that is recommended for you according to the platform, the feed that is generated by the algorithm. Right now, which categories of content have the most views? Try to understand what the general pattern is. You probably see that the images and videos that appeal to our primitive instincts and require very little reasoning are there. There are scandals, people fighting, semi-naked people dancing, photos of food, videos of places that you can travel to, cute animals, magic tricks, pranks, funny situations. That's what goes viral on social media. That's what gets shared the most. And the reason for that is, all of this is passive consumption material. It doesn't require us to have any critical thinking. Even a monkey can use a phone to scroll through the feed and take a look at that favorite content. The medium is the message, and how we consume information is as important as the information itself. Because when we read a book, our brain thinks differently, more slowly, and deeply. On the other hand, on social media, it tries to overstimulate the brain through a serial sequence of several short videos that leave you addicted to always look at the next one, at the next clip. And suddenly half an hour has passed and it didn't add any value to your life. Probably you know which platforms I'm talking about. When you understand that the medium is the message, you begin to see how social media is basically melting your brain. The idea that the medium is the message was developed by Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian communication theorist. This idea means that the way we consume information is as important as the information itself. For example, when we read a book, our brain thinks differently when we're exposed to the same type of ideas from that book, but however, they've been presented to us in the form of short videos that go viral on social media. Let me explain this. When we read a book, the brain needs to work to understand what is the story, what is the meaning behind it. And you can see all the details in our videos from the Study Arata series that talk in more detail how the brain works. But basically, when we just passively watch videos, that story is already being exposed right now in front of you. Doesn't require a lot of effort to understand. This might seem convenient, but actually it's not good at all. Because when we watch videos, everything is already done to grab our attention, to hold us there. The language used is very simple, it doesn't require you to be thinking a lot. And remember, the goal here is to make you spend as much time on that social network as possible to generate data and provide you some advertising. That's why viral videos are so addictive, but they're also not very intellectually stimulating. And it's not just the way that we consume information that is changing, it's how we perceive people. See, 200 years ago, when someone would write something, the focus would be on the quality of the ideas that were written. But now with videos, we care more about the appearance of people, not so much to the quality of the ideas. That's why some influencers are getting a lot of audience, even though maybe the quality of their ideas is not so great. The algorithm favors those who have more charisma, more presence in front of a camera, and not necessarily those who have the best information for you. That's the risk of valuing appearance over ideas and creativity. The medium is how we consume information. The medium shapes our perception of the world. And additionally, the medium also shapes our ability to think critically. The dominant media of any era shapes how we think and our perception of the world. 200 years ago, public discourse was conducted through books and newspaper articles and printed pamphlets. People used to read, reflect, discuss, writing other books and articles and response pamphlets. The debates were profound. You could only win if your arguments had a strong foundation. Back in the day, charisma played a very small role. Take a look at the Federalist Papers, for example. They were written 250 years ago by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay in the United States. 250 years ago. Now, give a copy of the Federalist Papers to today's most popular and highest voted politician. They will be unable to argue or even understand what is written. A university student today is far behind in reading and writing ability and even basic vocabulary proficiency compared to a university student from 200 centuries ago. A standard university student today would be expelled from a university 200 years ago, would be considered a functional illiterate. Now, why is that? To understand, I have to remember that the medium is the message. The medium shapes our perception of the world. The medium shapes our ability to reason. Now, what is the medium that we have today? What is the most present media in our lives? From the moment that we wake up until we go to bed, it is our phone. Our phone buzzing notifications of news on social media. And when you open it to see what that is about, it's usually short, superficial messages that play more on our emotions than our intellect. There's a lot of dirty politics, funny memes, people cursing each other, fighting over some polarization idea, people hypnotized by ideologies. None of this is by chance. Social media was designed to push content that appeals to our most primitive instincts of conflict and sex and survival. That's how they keep us hooked on their apps for longer. Our information comes from the media that even a monkey can use. Now, is the monkey as intelligent as a human, or have we become as stupid as monkeys? The rise of social media has changed the way that we consume information, how we think. It has melted our brains. It has led to a decline in our critical thinking skills. The result is a trivial culture that focuses on the superficial and immediate rather than the meaningful, the long term. When you ask somebody on the street, what is your purpose in life? They don't know how to answer. But if you ask, hey, have you seen that story of that guy who's cheated by his fiancee on that, in the middle of that reality show? They definitely know what you're talking about. This is a culture of triviality, gossip, and monkey business. If we are engaged with things that even a monkey can understand and interact with, well, this is very concerning. This is the cause of various problems that our society faces. When you see abuses being committed by large corporations and politicians in power, it is because the masses have been domesticated. They have been dumbed down by the point of being unable to organize collectively. The attack on education and the promotion of a culture of superficiality is a strategy of domination and social control. This is not by chance, it is planned. This is what we saw in our previous two episodes of the Arata Academy Summary series, which was about the books 1984 by George Orwell and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. We'll discuss these two scenarios in more detail later on this video, but for now, just remember that in those two books, people were dominated because they lacked the necessary education to be free. It is important to care about all of this because the way we consume information can have a negative impact in our intelligence or ability to think independently. If we're not careful, we can become passive, self-centered, and depend on instant gratification. It is important to take control of the way that we consume information so we can think critically and make our own decisions about the world around us. And one of the reasons why you need to understand the ideas in this book here is that it was published in 1985. It was a critique on the impact of television. The author, Neil Postman, died in 2003 before the creation of social networks like Orkut and Facebook. The internet was still not popular at the time of that publication, and we can already say that social media presents the same problems as the TV, but maybe even in a more powerful way. It's okay to have fun using social media as long as you also develop your intelligence through books. Calculate how much time you spend on each activity. Your value is not in the nonsense that you consume, but in what you consider to be important. So if you give a like to some cute kitten video or some silly prank, well, that will say very little about you. You show the world who you are through what you consider to be important. And what is this that you consider to be important? How do you get information that is important to you? I am not here to be imposing rules on what you should do or you should not do. What I invite you to do is to take a break. Think for yourself, decide for yourself, because only you can consider the dangers of the excessive use of social media and how this is impairing your ability to think critically, independently. And after making that assessment, you can think about the practical steps that you want to take to consume your information more intelligently. You need to measure. Now, how are you going to measure that? In kilos? Meters? In feet? No. You're going to measure by time. You can measure minutes. So here's another practical activity for you. You can start monitoring the amount of time that you spend each day doing different types of activities. Do you spend many hours discussing ideology, arguing with strangers, anonymous people on the internet with superficial arguments? Or do you spend the same amount of time reading books, taking notes on your deeper reflections of what you've read? What are the topics that you want to research more deeply? Compare the amount of time that you spend on social media and reading books. Are you one of the people who, for every 5 minutes that you spend reading books, Maybe you spend 55 minutes on social media. If you want to really develop your intelligence, it would be more appropriate to do the opposite. For every 5 minutes you spend on social media, you could spend 55 minutes reading good books. In addition to measuring in minutes, you can also measure in money. How much money do you spend on books, on knowledge each year? Do you think that this value is compatible with the importance that you would like to give to your learning? Only you can answer and make this judgment. It's okay to use social media as long as you understand that they have the limitation of superficiality. To delve deeper into any subject, it is necessary to make a conscious effort to read more books, to dive into deep thoughts that require reflection. It's not enough to just escape the manipulation of TV news. Don't be manipulated by social media. Make a habit of reading good books intelligently. Lately, there is this interesting phenomenon occurring that some people are realizing that the role of television news is not actually to be informing people, but to entertain, to push a certain narrative, and ultimately to be a profitable activity. These people have stopped watching TV to avoid being manipulated, but unfortunately now they became victims of another type of manipulation which comes from social media. Notice how books were completely ignored here as an option. Instead of 1 hour a day watching TV news, now they are watching the same news but on social media. However, the amount, the quality reading continues to be zero hours dedicated to books every day. The problem is not consuming content that we know is distracting. The problem is consuming superficial content, believing it to be important. We don't measure a culture by what it produces of trivial things, but rather by what it considers to be important. This means that we cannot evaluate a culture, a society, or even an individual just by looking at the silly things, the unimportant things it produces, but rather by looking at the things that are considered to be important and significant. It's like trying to understand someone only by looking at their toys instead of trying to understand what their values are. It's very sad to see people fighting angrily on social media because of ideologies that they don't even understand properly. They are just being pawns, being manipulated to serve the interests of groups behind these movements. And how do these movements capture the hearts, the souls of these people? The secret is not to educate, not to teach how to think. How come that relative, that friend of yours, who until some years ago was a very calm person, suddenly became a fanatical follower of some ideology? Unfortunately, easily manipulated people have a very weak intellectual background. Every human being needs to have a sense of belonging, to know who they are in the world, to understand their own values, to have an identity, to have a purpose. So when we live in a society that has so many disincentives for reading, for intellectual development, people feel empty. Their sense of identity becomes very weak. Now, you combine that with a shallow intellectual background formation, now you have the perfect formula to seduce crowds who need to identify with something. And then they will find their ideology that will continue to be recruiting new slaves. That's why it's so worth to remember the powerful sentence that we don't measure a culture by what it produces of trivial things, but rather by what it considers to be important. Watching a funny kitten video on social media is a triviality. It is not important, it's just a pastime. There's no big problem with that. The problem is when people are induced to believe that they're doing something important by following the message of their favorite political leader, their groups to be informed of the latest explosive event. There are people who closely follow influencers that they don't like just to be the first person to be able to point out their flaws and throw stones because they think that this rivalry will give meaning to their lives. There are people who sincerely believe that listening to an audiobook at a very high speed or following a podcast full of nonsense can replace deep reading of a high quality book. It's not enough just to listen to accelerated information. It's not enough just to be able to read many pages quickly, especially if you are in front of a book that it's worth reading. There are times you need to pause. You need to reflect. You need to take notes. You have to interrupt your reading and do extra research. Consult all the materials. We teach all of this in detail and with practical activities within our Intelligence Arata Academy training, which requires you to perform all these tasks so you can be approved to the next lesson. It is impossible to complete our Intelligence Arata Academy without actually reaping the benefits and actually become an intelligent reader. You can visit arata.se/intelligence to see our presentation. And we need to become more aware of what we consider to be important and significant in our own culture and society, not just focus on superficial and trivial things. It is essential that we remain alert to all of this because what we consider to be important shapes our perception of the world and our ability to make decisions. Are you trying to have fun or to learn? Social media is attacking our culture and literature. The main goal of both TV and social media is not to educate, it is not to inform, it is to make money by offering entertainment to us. Everything is just a business. They grab your attention, they provide you some shallow content that will hook you, and then they sell part of your attention to the advertisers. That's how it works. So if you really want to learn something, go to a good school, read books, do experiments, put your ideas into practice, see in practice how that theory can be put into real results. Now, if you want to just be consuming videos, listening podcasts, and watching social media and participating in live streams, keep in mind that you're not on a learning mission. You're just trying to have entertainment. That's an entertainment mission. And then this entertainment is being produced to generate profit by having the attention of people like you. And that's why there is a conflict of interest here. The content producer tends to be sensationalist. They try to hold you for as long as possible so you can get many ads as possible. That's basically how they make money. And that's why also they say, oh, you see, keep paying attention because there is something very important, something really big that's about to happen. It's going to cause a major crisis. They usually say things like that. They do that simply because they need viewers. They need to keep you hooked in a constant state of concern. We end up being trapped watching videos and scrolling through social media because they are designed to trap us. And over time, a strong connection is created between us and the screen that is a difficult habit to break. It's all a strategy to grab our attention, to make money. And it is different when we are reading. Reading requires concentration and thinking for a long period of time. Social media only provides us shallow distractions without context. That's why you're glued to your phone screen, and then somebody asks you, hey, what are you doing? And you're like, nothing. Well, yeah, that's right. You're doing nothing relevant. You're just wasting your life. Just enjoying yourself, amusing yourself until death. That's the title of the book that we're summarizing here. That's why people are reading fewer books and superficiality is increasing. Entertainment is becoming the focus of everything that we see on social media. Even news is presented in a way that it is fun to take a look at or to make you angry and jump to the next content and then keep you distracted. Try to think from the perspective of someone who produces social media content. What kind of content platforms will give them greater reach? Here at Arata Academy, I talk a lot about empathy. Because empathy can be a very good, very practical tool that you can use to better understand the world, to live better. For example, the episode 245 of the Hello, Say Arata series is basically telling us that empathy is a tool for understanding the world. So let's now do that. Let's use empathy to understand the people who produce content on social media. The first thing to remember when you are creating some content for social media is that it has to be easy for everybody to understand. You don't want to lose your audience, so you can't let them feel like they are not understanding what you're talking about. The content has to be created assuming that the person who's watching you has no idea, they know nothing about it. So you have to treat people as ignorant. That way, there is no barrier to entry. Everything is smooth and fun. The second thing is to make sure that the content is not confusing. You want to remove all complexity and explain everything in a very simple way. The focus should be on making your viewer feel good, so you cannot challenge them intellectually. And finally, avoid spending too much time on explanations and real arguments. Instead of that, make jokes, use memes, display selected pieces of your personal life to create a sense of intimacy. Tell some story that is easy to understand. It has to be very visual. Images and sounds should be carefully arranged to grab the attention of your viewer and keep them hooked until the end. That's the idea, to keep them hooked, not to confuse them. So when you're creating content for social media, you should keep in mind that everything has to be as simple as possible, easy to understand, and fun. It has to be shallow. Remember, the main goal here is to keep the viewer's attention and make them feel good, not to challenge them intellectually. And of course, images and sounds are crucial to make the program visually appealing and fun. If you can add some raunchiness, gossip, and play with the primitive emotions, even better. If you do all of that, it will go viral. If you only want to have fun all the time, you will never learn what is important. When you are in an intellectual journey, you have to accept that not everything is meant to be fun. Most of your time, you're going to be sitting in a chair, reading your books, trying to decipher the messages. What is the meaning? Things that are hard to understand. Often, you will need to resort to other sources of knowledge to give you the necessary foundation to finally be able to understand those pages you're trying to decipher. In other words, it takes a lot of work. It is tiring. And that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. Have you ever seen a viral video of someone teaching something that is usually considered to be boring, maybe math, but the video goes viral because they're using some magic tricks, they're using some other types of entertainment to teach. And then when you look at the comments, people usually say something like, oh wow, if only my school teacher was fun like that, maybe I'll have learned better. But it's important to realize that real learning isn't supposed to be always fun. It requires concentration, deep thinking, and a different way of using your brain when you're just being entertained. It is important to recognize that social media can influence our expectations of what education should be like. We might start to believe that everything should be fun. And if it's not fun, it should be avoided. Because what is boring doesn't deserve a view, doesn't deserve a like. And that is why many private schools, many very expensive schools are failing to form intelligent students. These classes are first of all planned to be fun. The teaching function, the pedagogical function, is put aside as a detail. Because if the class is boring, the students will complain to the principal or complain to their parents, who will complain to the principal. The parents don't have the necessary critical thinking. They put pressure on the school and on the teachers, so everybody has to be fun and creative and good. So they make the class more entertaining. That's what people want. But the truth is that education is not supposed to be fun. It is about inspire us to explore more, to learn rigorously, think deeply. All that process will take time and effort. It's not always fun. The problem with social media is that they can discourage us from valuing all these intellectual pursuits. By presenting everything in a form of entertainment, they make us believe that math and physics and even words should be fun. This is unrealistic. Education should make us interested in exploring more and learning more, not to discourage us from thinking about complicated problems. It is important to remember that education should inspire us to think critically so we can become well-formed individuals, and that might not always be easy or enjoyable, but in the end, that's what passed for us. In Orwell's 1984, books were prohibited. However, in Huxley's Brave New World, nobody's even interested in reading. Now we're getting to the best part, so I saved it for the end. In the introduction of Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman discusses two different kind of predictions of scenarios that were made by two different authors a long time ago. One author, George Orwell, thought that we would have this totalitarian society, dark scenario, rigid and controlled by violent tyrants and police force, and in this scenario, books would be prohibited. And then people wouldn't be able to think for themselves. We discussed already this book in our episode number 34 of the Arata Academy summary series. And then we have the other author, Aldous Huxley. He thought of a pretty different situation, a happy situation. He has this book, Brave New World, where he imagined a society where people would always be having fun. They would always be happy. But in this apparently perfect society, nobody needed to think for themselves because they were always distracted. It was not necessary to ban books because books were boring. People were just not interested in reading. The scary thing is that Huxley's predictions are becoming a reality in our excessive use of social media, of television, and entertainment. It is as if we are surrendering ourselves to these distractions, and that is increasing the risk of us becoming more stupid over time. The problem is that we're blind to the impact that this has on us, and all this superficial information stimulation is shaping our thinking. Now, the question is, how do we save ourselves from this strategy? The solution is to watch and question, what are we consuming? By asking questions, we can better understand the impact that technology has in our lives and make more informed decisions about how we use technology to our advantage. It is important to consider the disadvantages of how these technologies can both free and restrict us. We also have to think about how they impact our political life, our role as citizens, and the responsibility of our leaders. Most importantly, we should strive to control our technologies instead of being controlled by our technologies. There is a danger, a significant danger, of society becoming increasingly dependent on social media and entertainment technologies. Therefore, we need to become more aware and more selective in our consumption. We need to take a step back and question, what are we consuming? So we can gain more clarity and take control of our use of technology. This will help us to think more critically and make better decisions about how we use our time, how we use our attention. So be more selective in the content that you consume. Maybe you should be blocking some people, certain keywords that you know they are sources of superficial information. Prioritize high quality reading before you use social media. Keep track of your time. Make sure that you dedicate the proportion that you believe is the right proportion for you, both for good readings and social media. And always challenge yourself to seek opposing viewpoints so you can avoid group thinking, because social media tends to create bubbles where we only see similar content. Try to deepen your knowledge on important topics and read different types of books as well. You can use intelligence training techniques like the Evil Queen technique that we teach in the Intelligence Arata Academy. We have this technique that basically consists of explaining to yourself the main ideas of important books that you read. You can learn more about this and other techniques by going to arata.se/intelligence. Don't let technology control you. Always remember that you are responsible for making the best use of technology, learning to control it to achieve your goals. Let's take control of our use of technology, not let technology to control us. By reducing our dependence on social media, being selective and intentional with the information that we consume, and prioritizing high-quality reading, we can develop our cognitive skills. We can avoid the negative impact of this constant stream of superficial distractions, immediate gratification ideas. We can strive for a culture of critical thinking and meaningful engagement in the world around us. And you can start all of that right now by going to arata.se/intelligence.